So our first question in this method section is, how do you study something like sexual assault? And really, we want to focus on how you study something you can't directly observe. And this just isn't a problem for sexual assault. It's a problem for studying sex in general. So, if we want to look at a neighborhood, we can go and we can watch what happens in that neighborhood, but we can't do that for sex or for sexual assault. So what do?
So one thing that you do is triangulation, and I'm going to take a step back, explain triangulation, and talk about Schiff's overall research design before we circle back around to how we address this problem in the sexual assault research that we did. So what is triangulation? Think about a stool. If it only has one leg, it's pretty wobbly. And actually, if it has two legs, it's pretty wobbly too. But if it has three legs, that is a great stool. And triangulation is sort of that idea applied to research. It's using data collection to get at a different overlapping aspect of what you want to understand by using multiple approaches. So the research design that we used for this project was ethnographic research combined with, or in the context of, a much larger mixed methods research project. So that was SHIFT, or the Sexual Health Initiative to Foster Transformation, which I co-directed with a clinical psychologist, Claudette Mellons. It was funded by Columbia University, and it was sort of a moonshot level project. There were 8 faculty, a team of nearly 30 people, all focused on understanding sexual assault as a predictable element of the social context. So think about sexual assault. Like, we've known for decades that this is a thing that is awful and a pretty common element of the college experience. And so if it's something that happens so consistently, it can't just be a product of a few bad actors, although there certainly may be bad actors. We set out in this project to think about how sexual assault is literally designed into the campus experience, and then how it could be designed out of it. So the Sexual Health Initiative to Foster Transformation, or SHIFT. This is the rare example of an acronym that actually has a meaning, because our goal was to get people to shift their thinking about campus sexual assault, had a couple of different components of the work. The first was survey research. There were actually 2 forms of survey research that SHIFT used. One was a quantitative daily diary study, which we don't really draw on much in Sexual Citizens. And the second was a population-based survey of 2,500 undergraduates at Columbia and Barnard, which generated a 66% response rate. And in the book, we draw on published papers, and it's a great example of how you can get triangulation between ethnography and survey research, because ethnographic data can provide a deep dive into what people do and what that means to them, and how the world around them, the water that they swim through, shapes what they do. And then survey data can complement that by helping you see those findings in relation to patterns across the community. Another element, in addition to the combination of survey research and ethnography of the SHIFT approach, was taking a community-based participatory research approach. Most research, and I hope you're sitting down when I say this, most research has no effect on policy. People just generate knowledge and it goes out there in the world and it's ignored by people. And we didn't want to do this work and then hand over a binder to Columbia University and say, do this. And they probably didn't want us to give them a binder and tell them what to do anyway. That's not how people run institutions. And so from the beginning, we had 2 advisory boards, one comprised of undergraduates and one comprised of the administrators who shape campus life. And throughout the course of the research, we worked in conversation with them about what we were learning and what it might mean. And so all of this is preamble to the ethnographic research, but to show you sort of how it fit into the broader project. Now, Seamus is going to talk about what the actual ethnographic data collection looked like.
So Jennifer and I put together a research team of ethnographers, and it was Jennifer and me and 5 other people who did 4 basic studies. We did a series of interviews with people, we ran focus groups, we did key informant interviews, and we did participant observation. And I'm going to talk through each one of these and sort of give you a sense of how they fit together. So for the study, we interviewed 151 students. All of the students were undergraduates, and they were at Columbia University and Barnard College, which are part of one big undergraduate campus. And those interviews were about 2 hours each, and the aim was to get a sense of students' life before college, their life in college, and how their life related to the sexual experiences that they had. We asked them about the sex that they had and also about sexual assault. And for those interviews, for some of the students, there was so much to talk about that we did several rounds of follow-up interviews. So for some of them, we talked to them 3 separate times. Those interviews were recorded and transcribed, and we used them to tell a lot of the stories in Sexual Citizens. The aim of those interviews was to, in part, capture the diversity of student experiences. So Columbia is a diverse college. It has fewer than 50% of the students identify as white. Fewer than 80% identify as heterosexual. And so the interviews that we did sought to capture the diversity of student experiences, in part because we thought that diversity of student experiences is going to be reflected in the diversity of ways in which people experience sexual assault. In addition to talking to young people one-on-one, what we also wanted to do was to see how they collectively talked about sex. And in order to do that, we ran a range of focus groups. And those focus groups, some of them were just with students in general, like just a randomly collected group of young people. And then some of them were to target deliberately different kinds of groups. So one of the focus groups we ran was with religious students. We talked to first-year students alone. We talked to students of color. We talked to people who were the first in their family to go to college. All of this allowed us to get a sense of how students in general talked about their experiences and how particular students talked to one another about their experiences. Now, the key informant interviews allowed us to see how it was that critical people who were responsible for policies on campus viewed their jobs and did their jobs. This meant talking to RAs about what it was like to work on, a dorm floor and to enforce rules or not enforce rules and what they thought about that. It meant talking to deans and other people who were responsible for the student experiences and how they thought about their jobs, how they wanted to do their jobs, and what they thought of as the environment that was producing things like sexual assault. Now, talking to people is really important. You get the kinds of stories that we report, but what people say and what people do isn't always the same thing. And one of the things that makes Sexual Citizens really different than other kinds of studies that have looked at sex and sexual assault before is the participant observation. Now, by participant observation, what we mean is that we and our team embedded in the daily life of students. Jennifer and I spent time in a wide variety of places. We hung out in the dining hall, we spent time at sporting events, but we only went to places that students considered public. We thought it would be too invasive to be in some places like their private spaces. And so we hired 5 other people, 4 of whom spent a bunch of time with students in their more intimate spaces. So this meant being with them at places like religious student organizations or different kinds of organizations on campus. They spent time in fraternity basements. They hung out with students in common areas as they were sitting, chatting late into the night. They spent time in intramural sports leagues or on buses with students as they went somewhere, like athletic teams as they traveled to go to practice. Altogether, this gave us a kind of holistic view, and the aim of ethnography is really to give a sense of how people live their lives in the context of sort of the everyday institutions that they're a part of. And the interviews, the focus groups, the key informant interviews, and the participant observation together allow us to sort of pull back the curtain on what college life is like for these students and how they experience sex, and in particular, what it is that might explain why sexual assault is so common.